All right, guys, so now we're gonna go ahead and dive into fixed cost, okay? So fixed cost is those costs that remain the same in total dollar amount as the activity-based changes, right? So here's my example. So imagine we are now the producers of perfume, okay? So it says assume that Menton, excuse me, so assume that Menton manufactures bottles and distributes perfume. The production supervisor is Francine or Jane, you can call her whoever you want. And Francine or Jane is paid $75,000 per year, right? So let's first start off before we talk about fixed costs and how to apply this. So let's start off with just understanding what is our activity driver. In this example, what is driving our cost? Okay. So hopefully, based on our examples or prior videos, you should have realized that our activity driver is the number of bottles of perfume being produced, right? It is what's driving our cost. As we produce more, activity driver, producing perfume. All right, so when we're talking about relevant range, the relevant range in our example, very similar to what we get in the other videos, our relevant range represents what the cost that we are most interested in, okay? So in our example, our relevant range ranges from 50,000 bottles to 300,000 bottles. We're interested in understanding how our costs will behave if we produce anywhere between that spectrum. Okay. All right. So in looking at this table, what kind of interpretation would you take from it? All right. So look at the number of bottles being produced. Look at Jane's total salary, and then look at the salary per bottle of perfume produced. All right. So take a second, maybe pause the video and see if you can come up with some kind of interpretation as to what is happening. Okay. All right. So here's my interpretation, or here's my interpretation of what's going on. So as the company produces more bottles, so we see from 50,000 to 300,000 bottles. So as the company produces more bottles, the fixed cost, which is Jane's salary, decreases per unit, right? So when we produce 50,000 bottles, the salary per bottle was $1.50. But then at our very bottom, as we begin to produce more bottles of perfume, her salary became less expensive to us because now it was 25 cents per bottle, okay? So what we're saying here is when fixed cost is spread over a large number of bottles, the cost per unit starts to decrease, okay? So as we produce more, the cost per unit starts to decrease. We're spreading this $75,000 in salary, we're spreading it over more units, which is producing or resulting in a lower cost salary per bottle, okay? So now let's put this in like maybe some terms that we can maybe all relate to. Maybe you've been on a vacation, right? So let's say, for instance, this was your spring break plans, or maybe this is going to be your summer plans, or whatever you're into, right? You're going to go down to Cancun or wherever you like to go and have a good time. All right, but for me, I like some peace and quiet. I don't want to party. Those days are behind me. I know I'm kind of getting old, but those days are behind me, and maybe I want something a little more tranquil, or maybe I'm gonna do a 5-day vacation, and then like one of those days will be like party, 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 and then another day will be, or the rest of the remaining days will be very tranquil, beach, relax, and so forth and so on. All right, so let's take this concept and let me help you apply how fixed costs work. Okay, so before we do that, let's break down into some need to know things. So the cost per unit decreases as more units are being produced and vice versa. Okay, so what we saw here, excuse me, what we saw in this example before we moved on to vacation is the cost per unit as we produce more units, right? More here, from here to here, our cost per unit start to decrease, right? And then our total cost here, Jane's salary never changed. The total salary was always $75,000, okay? So now let's again put this in a more practical scenario that maybe you all can relate to. So give me a second, I'm gonna go to the white screen. Let's take, for instance, you know, we're going on vacation and we're renting an Airbnb, okay? Right. So let's say we're going to Cancun or Cancun somewhere, right? And let's say let's start off with saying that we're gonna rent our Airbnb or whatever you wanna rent using, okay? So let's say, for instance, it's one person going so far. So number of people gone or persons gone, right? So let's say we have number of people and then the cost of renting Airbnb. And then lastly, we're gonna do the cost per person. Oopsie. All right, so the cost per person, okay. All right, so let's say I just wanna being alone, I'm practicing social distance, or I wanna just kind of have a Zen moment and it's just me going, right? So the cost of renting an Airbnb in Cancun, Mexico is, say, you know, $4,000 for an all-inclusive, over-the-top, secluded type of experience, right? So then what is my cost per person? Well, I am the only one going. So therefore, I have to foot the bill, which is $4,000. Okay, so then I maybe realize that, oh man, that's going to be kind of quiet and lonely. And maybe I want to invite a friend, a girlfriend, or a good friend of mine. And maybe I invite another person. And now it's two people going. Now, regardless if one person are gone or two people are gone, the cost of renting an Airbnb for the next maybe 2 weeks or something is still going to be $4,000 no matter what, right? They're not budging. It is what it is, right? Now, the cost per person has effectively decreased, right? Because now it's no longer one person footing the bill for this entire B&B. Now we're going to split the cost. Now, what is the cost per person? It is $2,000 per person, right? I'm going to take $2,000 and whoever else I invited is going to take $2,000. All right, so let's imagine word has gotten out that I'm going to Cancun and everybody's excited and things of that nature. Sorry, I didn't spell Cancun right. So let's imagine the word has gotten out. So many people are needing some me time or they want to have a good time. And so before I know it, there's 10 people that's wanting to go, right? So what does not change is that whoever owns this Airbnb, the cost of renting it for these 2 weeks will be $4,000 no matter what. However, now that 10 people are going on this vacation, right, we're going to split it evenly, right? So what we're going to do is now the cost per person for 10 people to go is now $400 per person, right? So what we see in this example is the more people we invited to this, the more people we invited to the vacation in Cancun, the lower the cost per person it was. But what did not change was the total cost of the Airbnb, okay? So hopefully that makes sense to you guys, all right? So what I'm gonna do now, all right, so for my visual people, this is what this looks like visually. So fixed costs, if we have in a very first graph, we're talking about our total, the supervisor's salary, right? So Francine, her salary, no matter what, was $75,000, right? Or in our example that we did on a whiteboard, we looked at going to Cancun and the Airbnb was $4,000, right? So, you know, however you want to work it into the example. And then in the example that we did with Francine, here we're looking at the number of perfume bottles being produced. So regardless if we produce one bottle, if we're producing 30,000 bottles, right? Her salary will remain the same no matter what. The same thing with our Airbnb example. No matter if I invited one person or 10 people, the cost of their Airbnb would be $4,000 no matter what, okay? Lastly, so what we see here is, in our next example is the supervisor salary per unit, right? And then again, our number of units. So what we're saying is, as we produce more units, the cost per unit starts to decline. It starts to decrease. It started from, you know, $1.50, but as we produce more and more and more and more, it started to decrease until we were at 25 cents. Same thing with our Airbnb example. The more people I invited, it started off at $4,000 per person, and then I added another person and it became $2,000. Then I added more people until it became $400 per person, right? It still represents that same thing. It starts off here and then it declines as I add more people.